It's a pleasure to be here, and I will give you an overview today of an issue which could be sort of interesting to think about and maybe even discuss during the lecture, why some of us are more prone to stress, why some of us experience more stress, and why some groups in the society will experience more stress than the others. So while the previous lecture is more about the physiology of stress and its connection to the sleep mechanism and the restitution of the body, so this will be more psychology and more maybe social sciences rather than biology, which is covered in the previous lecture. And you're very welcome to comment or ask questions or interrupt me. And I hope that you can follow my speed and my accent. I was actually giving a lecture to young doctoral students at the Cotejo a few years ago. And in the middle of the lecture, a young fellow stand up and ask, "Aleksander, can you speak a bit faster?" So he was sort of commenting on my stress on lecture. So if you have any comments, please do. I am also a stress researcher, active in this field for about 30 years. For about 15 years ago, 16 years ago, we had suddenly a epidemic of the stress-related disorders in Sweden. We are talking about the middle of 1990s. And during this time, it was more often people from the public sector, born in the 40s, so they were in their 50 or 60 years of age. And when our society went through quite abrupt changes during this time, caused by the previous economical crisis in Sweden, then we had suddenly a large group of the 56 years old who, some of them at least, couldn't manage to keep going with those big changes appearing in our country. So a lot of stress. We started a small clinic at the Karolinska Institute to somehow learn how to regard those diseases, what's happening, why so many people, and what to do about it. And this clinic is going on now for quite a while. It's almost 14 years now. But the group which comes to the clinic has changed completely. And then I would like to comment as the first thing that actually we have a phenomenon in our country where the adults or the people with more advanced age are quite okay, while we have now the younger groups of people in Sweden who do have problems with their mental health and often connected to the stress issues. So if you look at the recent statistics, this is from the Socialstyrelsen, which is our national body to monitor health. You can, and you look at now in the group of the younger group of people in Sweden, representative of Sweden, 60 to 24 years old. And you look at the complaints connected to the mental health. Age is, the first data is from 88 and then 92 to 2004. And this is the complaints about anxiety, sleep anxiety, women and men, sleeping problems, moderate or severe pain in the neck or shoulders, chronic fatigue, general state of less good health, and reduced work capacity. And actually those are the figures which we suddenly notice in the various data concerning the mental health in Sweden. Then the youngest group in our country is not doing that great. If you look at the inpatient care, so more objective data now, not the data about the complaints, but actually the being in contact with the in-care, psychiatric in-care, while the psychosis levels between women and men 60 to 19 and 20 to 24 are stable. You can see the increased complaints, problems, or the hospitalizations around depression and depression is red, and then anxiety, especially about the young women in both group 20 to 24 and 16 to 19. If you look at the various studies, there are several studies of mental health in Sweden done in the recent years. In this picture you have five of them. In all those studies we see the increase of nervous complaints, depression, anxiety, felt down feeling, as you can see, and feeling sad, which are the formulations in various studies. And as you can see, there is a trend among the men, but it's not as dramatic as we can see in the group among the younger women. And then if you look at the stress-related complaints, I won't give you more statistics than this in this lecture, but just to introduce you, to show you that we are talking about something happening in our country. And you look at the incidence of the stress symptoms compared with 1998, and now we have 98 and 203 as the last point. We had a change in the younger group of men. We've seen increased year about 2000 and so, but then it's not increasing anymore in the youngest groups, but we still have see an increase among the young women, 16 to 24 and 25 to 44 years of age, while in the older groups we don't see that change. And in our clinic, which is a little summer house just located in the middle of the Karolinska Institute campus, where we're doing our treatment and studies around this issue. The majority of our patients are not now 50 and 60 as 10 years ago, but they are around 35 to 45, and 70% of them are women. So one can say that in the last 15 years in Sweden, the group which is more suffering of stress right now is the group of youngest and young women in the middle of life, and maybe we can have a bit of discussion about it, why and what's happening and why this group seems to have a problem with stress. Now, stress issue, just to give it a very short overview for you, is an idea which comes from physiological research in the 30s when Canadian researcher with Hungarian origin. He moved to Canada in the 30s, and he was studying how our organism and other organisms are affected by high demands, and he actually his idea was that he wanted to study the effect of strain on the body, but his English was not that great during this time, so he found the word stress rather than strain, and then in our daily language, stress is the synonym of too much of a lot of things. Now in the 70s, when I came to this research in Uppsala, one questioned this issue and said that, well, if everything too much is leading to problems with health and stress, why there are some people who can perform a lot, work many hours, be very active, and they don't seem to be stressed? And this research result, I want to show you the details, so I talk about it in the other lecture, but we change our idea what stress is. Now we don't think just about the demands put on our body, but we also think about the resources our organism has to deal with the demands put on us. So people who have very high demands, but their resources are in the same proportion to demands put on them, they won't necessarily experience stress, they will experience a very active life. This explains why the healthiest group we have in our society right now are the highest bosses. This is the most healthy group we have. Those are not the people who are usually not doing much, they are always quite active, But since they have a lot of resources to use when they are doing their stuff, and their remuneration, their rewards are quite high as well, they seem not to suffer from this problem, as a group at least. Now, we who have experienced life in which the demands and the resources are not in balance will experience this as a threat through our existence, and this feeling of threat because of this life imbalance is called stress, meaning that we are in a situation which is dangerous for us. So this experience of stress will be very unpleasant, and also it will motivate us to get back to the balance again. So this is an experience which is very difficult to get rid of, because it's there to help us out back to the more balanced life situation. So from this point of view, stress reminds the experience of thirst, of hunger. This is something is lacking, and it is so important that it should motivate us to get back to the balanced situation. Suddenly we got very interested not only in what are the demands which made us feeling in this overtaxed way in life, but what are the resources which a modern man or woman needs to live a life with high demands. And again, this I will more detail discuss in the other lecture, but in this case, I just wanted to point to you that some of us may end up in the situation which is over-demanding, overactive, but also the opposite imbalance, the life position in which the demands are too small, in which our resources are too high for the demands put on us in life, our aspirations, our economical demands or aspirations, then these life situations seem to lead us to the same experience of very dangerous imbalance in our organism, and will cause the feeling of stress. In the 70s, when we studied this, that was not the usual or normal position in our society, since we had a program in the society that everybody should have a place to be. Now, in the year 2013, we have about 1 million people among adults who are more or less out of the labor market, and many of them are in this very frustrated life position in which they experience a lot of stress because of this position. Now, our body is very well equipped to deal with a situation like this, and we call this situation, the situation of imbalance, and the programs which our body is equipped with as stress programs. And we can say that we have 3 kinds of programs. If we make quite a simplification, I would say, from physiological point of view. The first and the most normal way reacting to the situation of imbalance, to stress, is to use our big computer, which we have, to solve the problems. So, and we are fantastic as a species to do it. We try, and we usually do it. But in case this life situation, despite our big efforts and rational efforts, doesn't get solved, or if the danger is too threatening, then we might use a much more biologically driven programs. And we can say that we have 2 types, basically. One is a total acceleration of the body, total activation of the body by the sympathetic nervous system, with adrenaline and noradrenaline as a major vehicle for that in our body. And in this case, we are or getting at the danger or running away from the danger. That's why we call this program as a fight and flight response. So this is a very active program. Also, in case we feel that we are in a life position in which it is not impossible, it is very dangerous, but we cannot act we don't have a feeling that we have ability or possibility to act, then it seems that we have another program, which we call playing dead program, in which case the brake system gets on. This is parasympathetic nervous system, which tries to get us to be very inactive, to disappear, so we won't be a noticeable thing for this attacker. So in that case, we are dominated by the brake program. Since this one is also dealing with our accumulation of energy, so when we are dominated by this program during the long time, that our need of energy increases a lot, and then in that case we start to consume a lot of stuff in order to get energy for this future fight. So in that case we want to consume a lot of fat, a lot of sweet stuff, a lot of alcohol, a lot of whatever we can misuse. We misuse in this time, and my colleagues who study this claim that those increasing stomachs in some of us, in some periods of life, they might express hopelessness, of helplessness, rather than the good lifestyle. So this program will often use, without being even conscious about it, in situations which we consider as very dangerous, and at the same time which we consider that we cannot act or can do anything about it, hopeless and helpless. And we know where those more biological programs are directed from. If you look inside the brain, just behind our eyes, there are two structures which are called amygdala. Those two structures have a memory of everything which has been dangerous in our life before, as well what is dangerous for our species. So there, from the beginning, we have pictures of spiders and snakes and fire and heights and a lot of people. And then throughout the life, we put in those two structures also the pictures of what has been very dangerous in our life. So some of our patients can put Erickson's Loga or Karolinska Institute, or for the matter, the Koteho Loga, in that structure, and then when one goes through life and sees those symbols, one reacts to those symbols as well as snakes, heights, fire, and a lot of people, meaning that the amygdala will orient itself what's going on in the body and outside with the help of another structure which is nearby, which is like a cache memory system in our computer. It's called hippocampus. It's around the middle brain, and it gathers all the information, what's going on inside the body, what's going on outside. We have our GPS system, so we know where we are. We have our maps, and also we have our time frame. So amygdala is very close to the structure, so it can orient itself what's going on and where we are, and demand from the body one of those two ways of reacting without asking the big brain for permission. So those reactions are done very automatically. They are supposed to help us out of a terrible danger. However, in the modern life, this terrible danger can be not only the tiger or the other dangerous animals, but it can be also a boss which is a problematic, or an economic situation which is terrible, or maybe the sickness of somebody nearby, and so on. So it's not that easy to get rid of those taxing situations as maybe it was possible in our previous history. And also, probably this system is built for active, quick responses, and with the hope that we can or escape the danger, or maybe we won't just survive. But in the modern life, those dangers can be terrible, but they don't disappear sometimes for a very long time. That's why the problem becomes when those systems become chronic, that we are activated chronically with our stress responses. So something which is supposed to help us now can be a health problem for us. And we have Hans Scheer, who was talking about it. He was talking about some kind of a phases in the development of the reaction to the threat. So we use a lot of ways to deal with it, but when we cannot deal with this anymore, or that the problem becomes chronic, then we come to the period of exhaustion in which the body is or too much activated or too much deactivated. And we have quite a good science of it. We are very well informed that our body is dominated by any of those programs. So if you look, the first sign could be sleep disturbances. So in the case of fight or flight, we have difficulties falling asleep, we have a disturbed night, we have nightmares, and we often wake up very early, cannot fall asleep. But in case of playing that response, we can sleep as many hours as possible, and in any case, we wake up very tired and are tired throughout the day, while in the flight and fight response, we are overactive throughout 24 hours. Mood disturbances, in the case of fight and flight, we are something which was before very pleasant, now becomes very unpleasant, and also a lot of active emotions which are supposed to help us in this fight and flight response, meaning aggressivity, irritation, anxiety, panic anxiety. But in case of playing dead, it's the opposite. It's more of a, except besides tiredness, it's also that we are getting low, we are getting sad, we are getting depressed. A lot of cognitive disturbances. In case of fight and flight, we have too many thoughts, we are too activated, and we cannot think very logically because too much is happening. Or in case of playing dead, we just empty, nothing happens, no daydreams, no thoughts. And finally, a bit different physiological reactions, where in fight and flight we have overactivated body with the sign of cardiovascular or gastrointestinal problems. But in case of playing dead, we rather have those signs of quieting down and slowing down of the body, which is often connected to pain sensitivities, or pain sensitivity is increasing, and also this over stimulated body with too much of fat and sweet stuff and too much of alcohol and so on. So the signs are quite profound. Maybe we are quite used to the signs of this fight and flight response. We are much more less used to the signs of displaying dead. We often consider them as depression, right? But it's a special form of depression because it disappears very quickly in case we have a feeling that we can do something about the situation. And the problem, of course, is that now the body which is dominated, one of those stress programs is or too much acceleration or too much of the brake activity, meaning that we are becoming physiologically totally unbalanced, and that in turn can lead to a lot of health problems, which I won't tell you now about, but because I'm doing it in the other lecture. But the question is now why some of us have a problem with finding those stress situations too often, and why some of us react so strongly so we can have health problems out of the regular life situations. And in our clinic, as I told you, about 70% women. Now people don't come from the public sector, but they come from various sectors. But there is a problem which they have together, and it's an issue of very low self-esteem, which, independent of when they come from, what their age, they have in common. And the issue of self-esteem is a tricky issue in psychologists. Now I'll talk a bit like a psychologist. The issue of self-esteem is not an easy issue in psychology because it's difficult to measure and difficult to conceptualize it really. One attempt, I have actually written a book, which I will show you at the end, about this issue together with my colleague Joanna Rosa, who is a scientific reporter. And we wrote about 250 pages about it. We wrote it for our daughters, who during that time were very active and studying. And I don't think they read that book yet because they're too stressed for that. But we're trying to define the issue and give a lot of ideas about it. But sometimes it's difficult to get at the heart of the issue. I found a little quote in a book of Italo Svevo, a fantastic Italian writer. And he said that actually it is a issue of on the laugh against yourself. I'll show this citation in a moment. The first I will show you how the psychologists go about this, to ask about this issue of self-esteem. And we have something which is called Rosenberg self-esteem questionnaire. Now you have the first 5 questions which we ask our patients or people who are we think have a problem, and you can see that some of those questions are formulated positively, some negatively. And those questions are thought to be questions about own value. And then, if you look at the few more questions, they are supposed to mean, tap more the issue of competence. And our patients, unfortunately, will answer to most negatively to all those questions. This is a scale from 1 to 5, and they typically give us the maximum answer to those questions. And we call this scale the basic self-esteem, meaning that it's somehow is defined very early in life and very basic for a person's psychology. Italo Svevo tried to formulate it this way. It is an issue of love toward yourself, but it's not enough to love yourself, but also this love has to be answered by yourself. I don't know if you can catch the problem here, because there are a lot of people going around and saying, well, be positive, think positive about yourself. But if you inside don't believe that, then it won't work for you. So it's not enough just to give mantras and saying things. You have somehow be convinced inside of yourself that you should have a place on earth like everybody else. Now in psychology, you have 2 traditions around how this self-esteem feeling appears or is grounded. We have European psychology. In European psychology, from tradition from the Sigmund Freud and then Bowlby, we have an idea that this basic feeling of trust that I will have a place to be is grounded early in life, often by the significant people who take care of myself as a small child, and usually it doesn't have to be parents, but usually are parents, and that in this contact my needs are taken care of. I get some explanation of what's going on, I feel secure and I feel loved. So in that case, my basic feeling of self-esteem is established and I don't have to deal with it with the rest of the life. However, if this basic relationship is distorted or problematic in some way, then I might have a problem with it. And cognitive psychology, which follows those ideas from the almost 100 years ago, it talks about the disturbance of this basic attachment. And they have been done quite a lot of experiments around it. Some of them you can actually watch at the YouTube. I will give you an address where you can see some of the stuff, which is very interesting if you're really interested in this issue, in which you can see that what happens. So one does is that one goes with a small mother or father goes with a small child to a room. There are some toys. And after a short moment, this adult person will leave the child for a short moment. One observes what child is doing, while the adult is away, and then the adult returns. And when the adult returns, then one starts to see what the child does and what the adult does. And one can say that the majority of us, as a small children in this situation, which is called the normal attachment, or is that in that case we'll be very sad that the adult person leaves us. Then when the adult person comes back, we'll show that we are sad, and after a while we'll quiet down and we do things in this room. So this we'll call normal attachment. Why here you have this address in YouTube. You can just go on and check for the attachment theory, and you'll find the film sequences from those experiments. So the normal attachment is, that you have some kind of a secure balance between feeling attached to a person and being able to explore when you have this person around you. Now, some children do react to this situation in another way. They would, when the person comes back, they usually would not be trusted by that person. They will try to avoid that person. They will be very angry at that person, and then will explore things by themselves. This is later on in life called this avoidant attachment, meaning that one tries to, instead of having this balance between the attachment and exploration, one sort of had tendency to try to get out and ignore those people which are close to us. Then there is another, the reverse situation in which the child clings to the person who comes back, is very much into that person, and at the same time it is quite unhappy. It's difficult to trust a child in the situation. The children with this history of this kind of relationship will have a tendency to cling to the people who are close to them, have very difficulty exploring the world, being free, and so on. And then, this is also quite, those complications are quite normal, and they, as you can see, they are not that common. But there is one problem which appears much more in the clinical populations, meaning people with mental health problems, and this is called disorganized attachment. Meaning that there is no pattern, that the relationship is so complicated that the children have no way of dealing with it. So they do strange things like freezing or not responding at all to the parent and so on for a long time when they are left like this, provoked like this. And usually this form of attachment is often in the relationship between child and parent, which are complicated, in which the parents are not that great in that situation, or they are missing, or they're sick, or they are not doing their job as a parent. So this is basically the theory. If you want to go on and read about it, there are books about Per Granqvist, who is doing this research at Stockholm University, from whom I took this picture, and there's also quite a lot of discussion about it. There are ways of trying to deal with those issues later in life. There are ways, questionnaires in which one tries to understand which form of attachment you have. And of course, if you are interested, there are even books for adults, because think about the problems if the person has a tendency to have an avoidant attachment and meets a person who has ambivalent attachment, so two different forms of attachment. Can you imagine what kind of a complication there are going to be in the relationship, right? Are you with me? We deal differently with this question of closeness and freedom and all this and that kind of. So anyhow, but the basic issue here is that the basic feeling of some kind of self-esteem can be troubled by those early relationships. Then we have also the American tradition of psychology. Modern American psychology was grounded by William James, who was a father of American psychology, a very exciting person, and his textbook of psychology still can be read with a big interest because he has done a lot of experiments. And his idea was that the self-esteem is an issue, simple result of a formula. It's a question of ability and ambition. In both those sides of life are okay. In proportion, there is self-esteem is all right. But in case our ambition is overshooting our abilities, then of course we are in trouble. I spent a few years as a postdoc in Baltimore doing, I had 2 small children with me there, and my children went to the daycare center there, and they were coming home and singing, "I am the best," you know, this American way of, middle-class American way of attitude toward oneself. And this kind of thinking has influenced a lot the American way of upbringing people, at least in middle class. But they were not just singing, "I am the best," meaning that increasing ambition, but also, even in this primary care system, they got quite a lot of abilities. You know, they were speaking publicly, they were summarizing, they were presenting themselves. The sports and the school is not separated in the States, so you have much more ability to test yourself, to test your skills, to be good at something. So, and if you hear to the American presenters, right, when they give lectures, it's fantastic their level of skill in this, because they train it very early. So a lot of American middle class way is built on this idea. And then in the modern cognitive psychology, one of course tries to make some kind of a combination of both ways of thinking. And if you can think about 2 dimensions, the dimension of value, which is grounded early in life, and then dimension of competence, which is more developed later in life when we start to interact with other people, when we are learning and doing, then people who miss or lack this value feeling inside, and also who didn't develop their competence, they of course will experience a very low self-esteem. Now, my therapists who work with me also talk about something which is called unstable self-esteem. And unstable self-esteem, in case of people who have got the value feeling but not developed much of competence, would be that those people are very dependent on other people's approval, of course, right? Because this is the only way you can feel that you have some kind of a self-value. So when it disappears, then you go quickly down to this feeling of low self-esteem. Now, the other people who didn't get much of this, but develop a lot of competence, usually our patients in our clinic are like this, people with very high achievements, a lot of successes. They will also be unstable in this way that if they cannot perform, then also they will automatically go back into this feeling of low self-esteem. And then majority of us are somewhere in between those 2 lines, right? And of course, when we have enough of value of competence feeling, then we don't ask this question. We just feel all right as we are and deal with other things, an issue of self-value. But people who miss this feeling in one or another way, they won't give up. They usually will try to compensate. And the most, there are not many ways to do it. One is through relationship. So we become very important for a lot of other people. We become a source of help and support for a lot of people. Usually this is the way women deal with this issue, but also some men. Both sexes are can compensate by performing, by being fantastic in a lot of things. And also perfectionism is since I know better how things should be for me, for others, so it decreases a bit of the anxiety coupled to this issue. So this compensation becomes our way of life, and my colleague Leonard Halston tried to develop a very small, short and simple instrument called performance-based self-esteem with 4 questions, very delicately formulated. And people who now answer our Rosenberg questionnaire about the basic self-esteem and also are extreme, agree completely with this questionnaire, we would like to call the achievement freaks, people who have low basic self-esteem and they're high on the performance-based self-esteem. They would like to compensate for it. In Swedish, we call them prestationsprinsessor or prinsar, which may be better sort of taps this concept about this life position in which one is so dedicated to this issue of compensation for this feeling which is lacking, feeling of that my presence in the world is as normal as everybody else. So people with this kind of life position, which we actually define by just 14 questions, very simple questionnaires, people with this kind of life position, they will be very engaged, they will have very difficult to say no when asked by others. One will be perfectionistic for most of the stuff in life. One usually will try to find an occupation which is very demanding. The small problems become a big problem, and it's very difficult to quiet down the stress mechanism when they go on, because one is so into those issues one is involved in life. I don't know if you can see a person like this around you, or maybe it reminds of something you feel yourself, but this feeling of being this, as we call it, achievement freak or prestationsprinsessa and prince is quite prevalent among our patients and quite prevalent in professions like university teachers or journalists or physicians or people who try to find demanding positions in life. And this life position can be fantastic because it leads to enormous performances, right? This person is doing a lot of stuff because it is fighting all the time, not with life itself, but the feeling inside that I am not adequate, I am not good enough, I don't have a real reason to be on the world, so I have to really go on. And of course, this is very difficult to fulfill, so you are always on because of this psychological demands put on you. One of our patients tried to illustrate this issue by saying that, well, you never succeed. So this is like filling the Grand Canyon with the tablespoon. I mean, doesn't really help. So you go on, sometimes you are enormously successful in life position, but there is one problem which leads to then that there is a risk to become our patient, our stress clinic. And the problem is as follows. My colleague at the Stockholm University, she's studying this issue with the students at the university, and Marit Jonsson is her name, and she also had the doctoral students, Victoria Blum, and they invited a group of Stockholm University students to a math test. She divided them into achievement freaks or no, and the problem was that this math test was not possible to solve. So after a few minutes or hours, in some cases, people said, well, I cannot do it. This is too difficult. I don't know enough math. If you were not achievement freak, you just did that. But our achievement freaks never give up. They just go on, right? So the problem becomes that they are too activated. They actually measure their heart rate and blood pressure and so on. So there are more and more activation, no result. So the issue here is that people with this kind of a life position, they will never give up. They would just go on in relationships who are not productive or not positive, with jobs which are not fitting them well, with the life situations who are just nonsense, because one is not rational. One is all the time going after this feeling of not being good enough, not having enough of the self-esteem. Not because one wants to solve the life problems or the work problems in itself. This is all the time the issue of one's own inadequacy, which one is dealing with all the time. So this is, of course, a very dangerous life position, which might lead to a lot of problems. I will give you some more ideas about it, and then maybe we talk what contributes to the life position and why young women and so on. After a short pause, we might just take 5 minutes for just to move around a bit. Okay? And what I am now going through is our individual sensitivity. Of course, our society in times like this is loving those achievement freaks, right? We love them to have around them because they do it. They just never say no. They always will try to outperform. They will be very kind often because they are very afraid of their own self-value and so on. So they're easy to manipulate by demands around and quite easily used by both by the employers and also the families. One should be quite careful to deal with them actually because of this trap built in this kind of life position. So I will try to comment in a moment. I would just wanted to continue by telling you that since we were used to people who are about 50 and 60 with the severe stress problems, now we started to see in our clinic people with around 30 with the same kind of, say, severity of the stress problems as the people seen before from the public sector. So we started to get interested. How come those people can be so severely affected by just 5 or 10 years of the professional life, while before we had people after 30 years of professional life or 40 years of professional life. So we started to interview them and of course find out that this overachievement and this tension in life because of this life position was not going on only in the professional life, but also during the higher education, during the high schools, and even in the middle schools. And somewhere, it seems like age of 12, 13, when this issue becomes quite important. Actually, I don't know if you're aware of it, but we have in the health surveys of the children's health in the world, Sweden is leading. We have maybe the healthiest children whole world. I'll share it with some other countries, but we are at the top at the age of 7, 9, and 11, but not later on. So something is happening after the age of 11, and you might have some comments about it. So what we've done is that we, after the interviews with our patients, we went to a few high schools in Stockholm, the high achievement high schools, because that we wanted to be sure that we find our patients in the retrospective, I would say, before they became our patients. And we gave our questionnaires to a large group of 16 years old. I will show you the data from one of the schools. This is Hässelby High School in Lidingö, not far from here. Very ambitious, fantastic school with fantastic youngsters. And in our questionnaires, about 70% of youngsters are in perfect health and feeling great, but we find 30% who have quite a lot of stress problems around their health, connected with stress, and as you can see, there are double as many girls and boys in this group. We followed those youngsters to the final grades in the 3 years after. 3 years after, right? This is and the final grades were as follows. Those youngsters who have symptoms of stress at the beginning or at the end of the high school had very high level of their final grade. The students who didn't have sign stress at the beginning and the end had also very high levels of stress, of grades. But students with chronic stress, meaning that they had the symptoms of stress both at the beginning of the high school and the end of high school, had remarkably lower grades comparing to the rest of the students. So chronic stress was for us a very good predictor of the final grades in a school in which everybody to get in has to have a very high grade to begin with. So those are high achievers from the begin with, and then something happens to them throughout the high school time. Now, when we try to predict those with chronic stress, we find that the place number one, the level of self-esteem, this global self-esteem, the Rosenberg, sleep disturbances, bad food habits, usually skipping breakfast and lunch, the feeling of high demands put on them, and the experience of low control in life. So those, with the help of those 5 factors, we explain quite a lot of variance in the stress symptoms issue. Now, it becomes also interesting to ask the question, what happened with our achievement princesses and princes, right? What happened with them, with their grades? And it turned out to be that the people with achievement freaks who didn't have stress experience throughout the high school, at the end, or the beginning or the end, or as a chronic, they got the highest grades in the whole high school. And that's not surprising, is it? I mean, those people will go on. But if they had the chronic stress, then they got a very low grades at the end of the high school. So the issue here is that if you are in this life position, you have to be very well equipped to deal with it in a proper manner. Otherwise, you have a problem with your performance. That's what this picture shows us. It was a bit complicated message to the youngsters, how to explain to them what we actually mean by this. But we mean, of course, that people who have this kind of a life position, they will probably have to take care of themselves quite well and not react too strongly and sleep well and eat and take care of themselves in order to function well. So this is basically what we found in this study. I probably won't say so much more about this issue of achievement trap and the self-esteem, except that at the end of the lecture I will try to come back and discuss with you what one can do about it. But I wanted before that to discuss a bit of this societal aspect of it, as one of you asked me, how about the society, how it is affecting this kind of life position. And why are women in such a dangerous position from the point of view of stress-related disorders and the light psychiatry right now in our society? One men are dealing better with it and not as hard exposed to the stress issues as women right now. And the first issue maybe is the issue of the images we sell to our young people or to our society This is I looked through 1 year of the paper called Mama, and I myself have 4 children in my house, and my children never looked that styled month after month after month, and journals like this present to us. Actually, and if you think about the amount of money our societies are spending on creating issues, or creating images, how we're supposed to look, how we're supposed to behave, how we're supposed to dress, So, for example, if you want to connect it to our youngsters again, so a few years ago there was a study conducted in Stockholm with the students in the middle schools in Stockholm, in which one showed them, among other things, a body of a girl and body of a boy drawn in 10 stages, from very thin to quite round. And when this picture was shown to boys, and one asked, "Where are you yourself?" they usually pointed to the middle. And when the researchers asked them, "And what would you like to be?" they also pointed to the middle. Of course, when one showed this picture to girls and asked, "Where are you?" they usually pointed toward the 7, the runway. And when one asked them, "And what would you like to be?" they were around 3. So the discrepancy in the age of 11 or 12 is already enormous. And this picture we are pushing on is crazy, even in the society in which we have fantastic people with fantastic look and with fantastic abilities and so on. So we are creating those images all the time for enormous cost as well to the society, which are totally unrealistic. Actually, I was giving a lecture once to chiefs of the various newspapers like this about stress. They wanted to learn how to stress less and sleep better. And I asked them, I was just for fun of it, so I asked them, "Have you ever tried to put a normally looking person on the front of your journal?" And they laughed, and somebody said, "Well, we tried once, but it didn't work." People bought much less of this paper. So this is some kind of circle reinforcing each other, right, in which people sell us the images which we think we would like to see, and so on. So this is a theme which is quite important, I think, to society in which we live now, in which those images of how we should be are so strongly pushed. Now that there is an issue, second issue, is the issue of this is actually one of those people. This is Amelia, who has several journals like this. And this Amelia represents now another issue, which is a big study of women bosses in various cultures in Europe. About 2,000 bosses and how they're perceived by their coworkers. And since we are living in a culture which is still dominated by the masculine norms, so in that culture, women usually, especially when they come to the level where they start to compete with men, they will be perceived as wrong. Either they are too tough in a culture which are more permissive, or they are too soft if they are in a cultures which are more authoritative and more unpermissive. So, in a sense, one could say that both in dress and in behavior, the women will be wrong because they are not men and not men in the right sense of the word. So we have an issue which I think is also quite understandable for women who are in our competition system, in the system we created, we live right now, is that we still have quite a big inequality between the sexes, which can be seen in various ways. For example, if you look at the Statistical Central Bureau data about the accumulated income throughout the years, this is not one person, this is the average income throughout those ages between men and women, you can see that there is a very systematic difference which follows throughout the whole life. So, I don't know if you have done anything like this in the research bodies which give money to Koteho, but at my school at Karolinska Institute a few years ago, that when we have still the Medical Research Council, there few people have done a study in which they compared the amount of research papers which has to be published by women and female and male researchers to obtain the same amount of the grant crowns. It turned out that women researchers had to publish double as many papers for the same amount of the grant support. This is not a long time ago. The whole Medical Research Council had to resign after this study. There was a big scandal around it, but I think the situation continues because we still live in a society in which the male norms dominate, in which there is, of course, a barrier. So I think that if we ask a question why our young girls in this Heshby High School are making more lessons during the evenings, during the weekdays and during the weekends, so probably one reason is that they somehow fight to get as high grades so they can compete to get in life, and they already know that they have to be very good in order to compete. So somehow this inequality is with us throughout the life right now. This is another comparison done by Statistical Central Bureau in which you compare the incomes, average incomes in various areas in our country. If you don't consider the half times and stuff like this, but also if you try to be very accurate about the weighting, all the issues of the time put on work, then even then you find a change, as a difference in the average levels. And here is a description of maybe another issue which I would like to get into. This is a young student at the animation school who listened to my lecture, gave me a series of pictures just illustrating the day of a couple in which the men and women were working. Now they are at home. And this is maybe the most typical evening situation. And actually, as far as there is a doctoral dissertation from Stockholm University done by Katarina Boye, in which she shows that in the couples who work full-time, women do the 70% of the work duties at home. If both work full-time, then the time increases to the 80%. And unfortunately, in the more equal couples, men feel worse. So it's not they both feel better, but right now, men feel worse. So the issue of the double work and the issue of this difference in between the amount of time put into work. This is data from also recent data amount the hours put per week from 82 to 2003 by women and men. This is a paid work now, and this is the single parents with children is this curve. This is women. Single parents with children which are older. This is the younger children. This is the older children. And then you have cohabitating parents and cohabitating with small children and with older children. So what you see here, well, this is the time put by the men group. And we actually, what we observe, that this is the increasing paid work time for women in all the groups. So this is, if you add to this the work time put at home, then actually women perform more work throughout the week than men do. And here you have a picture of stress hormones. This is noradrenaline. So this is the fight-flight response hormone, as you remember from the beginning of the lecture, among the healthy and well-functioning bosses at Volvo in Gothenburg. And this is the men's levels throughout the work and when they do come home. And this is the women's stress hormones during the work and when do they come home. If they have children at home, the levels toward the night are the highest throughout the 24 hours. And here is another scientific picture which I hope that you can follow me with. This is the data from my colleagues, sleep researchers, Göran Czeklund and Torbjörn Åkerstedt, who studied the various sleep stages in a group of flying personnel which are going to fly early in the morning from Orlando. And the night before, the researchers put electrodes at their home so they can check various sleep stages, amount of various sleep stages the night before. And this is the amount of the so-called slow wave sleep. This is the sleep, this is the deepest sleep we have throughout the sleep, and this is considered to be the most physiologically restituting part of sleep. We have around 100 minutes of that throughout the night, as you can see here. And just before the people went to sleep, the researcher asked them to answer a question: what do you think about? If they think intensively about the next day problems, okay, it's called apprehension here, then they managed to reduce the amount of slow wave sleep from about 100 minutes to about 50 minutes without affecting the sleep length. So worrying about the planning, doing all those things which usually women are so good at because they have responsibility for, as you can see in this picture, for what's happening, this acceleration before they go to bed and also planning for the next day or the next week, usually leads to a situation in which the sleep during the night is less recovering, because physiologically recovering, because you miss those 50 minutes of slow wave sleep. So that probably explains why we have double so many women as men complaining in Sweden about the sleep problems. And as you probably know, the sleep problems are now quite a big issue, health issue in Sweden and all other Western countries, that we have about 1/5 of adults are complaining about the sleep problems right now. Double as many women as men in Sweden. So one can say that this overactive, maybe I just comment this picture. So one can say that if you think about the connection between stress and sleep, so basically the issue is that if you are stressed a lot during the day, you will sleep very well because you will be tired. But if this lot of stress life situation leads you to not be able to stop about the problems before you go to sleep, if you instead try to ruminate, try to think, try to solve all those problems which are going to come to you the next day, then you will be quite consequently, night after night, reducing the amount of the slow wave sleep, meaning that you will reduce the quality of your sleep and recovery, restitution. And that, unfortunately, is happening for men and women because they have responsibilities, and the major responsibility for the home, and also maybe women have a bit of a tendency for rumination, for thinking about what's going on to happen. So this is a problem which may explain why we have so many women with sleep problems right now in Sweden. Now, about all the cultures which have some ideas about how to live well, how to live well so you can have a good health in the future. And keep your health. And in our culture, you could, for example, see about 800 years ago in the Benedictine cloisters, house rules, cloisters rules, which stipulated that you should sleep about 8 hours, be active about 8 hours, and then you should have time for something which is called vita contemplativa, time to contact with yourself, to contact with others, to contact with nature, and also to have a contact with the big forces. This is why our culture developed cloisters, because people will have time to be in contact with the big forces. Only about 200 years ago, our culture started to value the vita activa as the most important part of life, right? The achievement and performance. So today's lifestyle is now reduced. We already reduced the average sleep time in Sweden under 7 hours, and we are still shortening it from 8, which was stipulated by our culture before. And the rest of the 24 hours is vita activa. We are quite good at eliminating this vita contemplativa. Men are a bit better to keep their ice hockey or basket or going with friends and drinking beer, and women are quite good, ironically speaking, about eliminating their own time in favor of family or work. So in times in which we live right now, probably we are quite good abusers of our own time. Now you can probably think that sleep is one thing of helping our body to recover, recuperate, learn, clean the memory system and so on, but this vita contemplativa is probably to put some parts of our organism to rest so we can use other parts, so we can have a kind of more natural use of our body's various systems. Now, if we are just concentrated on one thing like this, then probably we are misusing some parts, like the brain, for example, in favor of other parts of the body, which might lead to uneven use of our organism. So one can say that basically, if we go back to this issue of how society is contributing to this life position, so I think that there are some major issues. The one is, of course, the images we're selling, so how we are supposed to live, how we're supposed to look, how we're supposed to be so active and so successful is one thing. And of course, the society based on consumption is contributing a lot to this kind of a picture. The other one is the issue of inequality between sexes, in which women are still in disadvantage, even if they're as well educated and as capable as men to do majority of the jobs in our society. And maybe also this issue that the double responsibility that women didn't yet resign from this major responsibility for the home when we have children. So some of my colleagues say that when with that competent women group in Western countries, if women give up this responsibility, men will have no chance whatsoever to succeed, because, that's what's actually happening in Italy, for example. Since it's so difficult to have both career and children, so young women don't give birth. So the nativity is going enormously down, which just is, I don't know if they refuse to have sex, but they don't want children, because it's impossible to have both career and children at the same time for many of them. So we'll see how this will evolve, but we have those issues which are certainly contributing to the problem we're discussing now. I don't know, do you feel like I answer a bit of these questions? Okay. Are there any other comments about it before I go to the issue of what we should do about the problem we raised. Is there anybody who would like to comment or contribute? Yes? That before being competitive in our society was considered to be not especially pleasant characteristic, while now it is quite fitting into the that society we have. Yes, it is a change of values which is quite noticeable. I don't know if you're aware of it, but there is something which is called World Value Survey. When one sort of checks how various societies, I think about 70 or countries involved, value various things. And Sweden suddenly is leading the world values in two issues. One is the level of secularity, meaning that we stop believing in big forces, stop believing in God as a society. But in the second place, what is also that we are leading actually the World Value Survey is individuality. From a society which was through many years after the Second War driven by the more general values, right? The group values, suddenly we are the country of individuals. Competition is, I think, part of it, right? If my individual life is the most important, then I will compete against others, right? Because it is, so it will have a much bigger value. I think, well, one of the answers, maybe there are some. Any other comments about this part of the lecture? Okay, if you feel like having other comments, please say that. So, what we can do to help ourselves when we are in this achievement trap, how can we think about it? What can we do about it? One can say that working with self-esteem, the first, maybe most important issue is the insight that actually I am having this problem. I am, or people who are near me are fighting this life battle to somehow maintain or achieve some kind of a feeling which is very impossible to get if you didn't get it to begin with. Of course, one could also see what's going on when one tries not to compensate. One says no, when one is not jumping to all the negatives or the demands, and see what happens. Usually what happens is, and that's why we never, if we are in that life position, seldom do it, that then if we try not to compensate, that we get into this feeling of low self-esteem, which is terrible to experience, right? So we can be very low, very depressed of this feeling, and it's difficult to tolerate it. This is why we are so good at compensation, because we don't want to experience this. So it can be very painful. But if one can tolerate a bit of this pain, it can be very interesting to see that if one does say no, nothing happens, or not much happens. Maybe even people start to respect one because one is more affirmative about one's needs. The other way of sort of trying to work with yourself is the issue of control. What happens if I lose control? For example, if you talk to a stranger, well, usually nothing happens. Usually you find that you just exaggerate. The real situation is what it is. Sometimes it's pleasant, sometimes unpleasant, but has nothing comparing to all the fears you can produce in your head when you are in this type position, right? So it can be very instructive to sort of work with yourself around these issues of control or issues of saying no, or issues of somehow putting yourself in situations to question your basic assumptions. Now, You could, of course, work in the more American tradition into increasing your competence or decreasing your ambition. And you could, of course, ask for help. You could demand equality at home, which can be quite interesting experience if one actually goes for it in your real terms. You can give others a chance to be achievers by delegating things. It's so pleasant when suddenly other people start to do things which one thought that one always have to do. Maybe go on with your skills so you can be much efficient and better in things. And also what is very important for the women's health, men quite naturally often find support groups, friends groups. They try to find a mentor somewhere just to feel that one is not alone. One traditionally built has a group behavior, while women often find themselves competing with other women, especially in the work situations. And it is not so stupid in that case to find mentors, often higher in the hierarchy, which can help oneself, not only in thoughts and interpretations, but also in real career moves and so on. And maybe even to somehow not forget the support groups, which can be helpful. And also, one as a psychologist learns that it's not such a good idea as a therapist, for example, to work with your weaknesses, weak sides, because then it won't do so much of a therapeutic activity. But if you are aware what are your positive sides, what are your strong sides, then usually try to use them in therapeutic work. And this is also true for life, that if you are more aware of what are your positive sides, what are your negative sides, we are never perfect in everything, but we have more strengths and weaknesses. Why not try to use your positive side and forget about the other ones, or try not to push them too much, because usually that won't lead to any big success. And also one can lower one's ambitions a bit by, for example, saying no, or considering that there are only 24 hours to do stuff. What is most important. And also maybe, even if one is very perfectionistically minded, one could use this demand on yourself or life more selectively. Then you don't use this perfectionistic tendency in everything. Maybe, unfortunately, if we visit our patients, for example, which I do sometimes, you can find that not only they try to be perfect at work, but if you go to their homes, they are as perfect as well. They try to be perfect on each aspect of their life, which is impossible probably in the level of such high expectations in our life right now is. Then there is this to be best paradox. We are now talking about people who are best at a lot of stuff. So if you are best, then you find yourself with the other best people all the time, right? Finally you end up where they're on the best. I remember that I was dealing with one of those big consulting agencies who employ the top 5% of graduates of the high schools in the world. You are among those, you are among at least the best achievers they are on Earth right now. So you cannot do better. So actually, to consider that finally you have to be your own standard and you don't have to compare yourself to others, and your best is probably the best you can do, is a kind of good advice. Then there are also, as you remember from the high school and the stress issue in our performer freaks or prestationsprincesser at the age of 16, which leads to a very poor final results, if you have a chronic stress issue present, is that they are quite good shields against stress in the normal life. And as you remember, this balance or imbalance picture I gave you, that demands and the resources can be in balance. So if you think about the issue of resources, they're not that complicated. Enough of sleep, enough of rest every day, your own time, some physical activity, of course not misusing too much of fat and alcohol and all this. Time for relationship, feeling that you are on top of your life, that you have power to decide in your life or over your life, meaning control. And also some kind of a feeling of meaning in what you're doing, or at least the feeling that you get the proper rewards for what you're doing. So all this, which I call taking care of yourself, is quite a good defense against the life stresses. So don't, in that case, if you're a person who is in this life position, so it's even more important to take care of those basic truths about the stress defense. If I would put my priorities here, so I think that enough of sleep would be the most important level of this stress defense, if you want. And I think, as a stress researcher, now after my experience, that it's very difficult to stress somebody at the level of stress disease if one has a robust sleep function. It's probably impossible. Because you have to somehow damage the recovery, the recuperation system of the body in order to be sick of stress. Now, then it comes the issue of professional help. If you cannot teach yourself to do better, if you cannot read yourself to do better, if it's not enough, it doesn't work, often it means that the legacy, your history of your life is quite tough, basically. And actually, in our patients, some of them have a very tough histories, especially when they were very small. So in that case, nothing helps but professional help. And professional help nowadays is easy to obtain. Often it's cognitive therapy, but there are other therapies, and it's usually not that expensive. And people who do it, they are quite competent, because this is one of the most normal, common problem in psychotherapy right now with modern young people. So people who do this stuff are quite competent. And also as a reward, you might find that you are acting more realistic, that you are much more efficient, and also that you will find a principle that the acting by pleasure principle is much more fun and much more rewarding than by acting by the principle of avoiding fear of failure, which can be very damaging to your emotional life. So I think that there are rewards, and the price of this nowadays is like a price of a week trip abroad. So it's not that terribly expensive either, if you consider with other expenses we usually take to feel a bit better. So I wouldn't hesitate if I would be a person who is living in this life position most of the time, or if you have people around you who are like this, that it would be quite wise to invest some time in the more professional psychotherapeutic help. Any comment or question about it, or it feels like quite obvious to you? One could have an issue of if this is something which could be paid by the personal organization at your school, for example, like the support of this kind of a, well, there are, as I understand, there is a health system with psychologists also, so probably one could get at least some kind of direction in obtaining the help. Now, I am quite confident that, and quite happy that we actually have quite good psychotherapeutic instruments to help people with extreme kind of problem around the self-esteem issue. I am much less optimistic if we go to our society. Our program at the schools was not only to find our achievement freaks before their life, but also to try to attempt to change the stress levels in those schools. And we didn't succeed that well, except for a quite big response, quite good success among the extreme students with individual therapeutic activity. That worked beautifully. The rest of our activity didn't pay much as considered the general level of stress in those schools. So I don't think, because I think that in schools like this, those schools reflect the society at Lidingö and other parts of central Stockholm, where life is like it is. We found quite a high correlation between the self-esteem between the children at the age of 16 and their mothers, for example. We also found quite a high correlation between the level of stress of children of their parents. I think that the schools reflect the society, the near society which they live in. Maybe as a parent one could think about the issues of education of our children, that maybe we should be quite nuanced how we look at our children, not to give the general support like I'm coming originally from Poland, and if you want to reward children in Poland, you don't say, what do you say in Sweden when you say that you want to reward the child? This is the word duktig, right? You say, you are duktig. In Poland, in my country, you say, you are nice instead. So it's a different kind of manipulation we're doing in various societies. Actually, I don't know what one nowadays say in the States about it. Well, and giving the children and helping them also to get the more adequate picture of what their strengths and weaknesses, to be sort of more nuanced about it, I think could be quite good. And also maybe what is a big issue right now in our culture is actually the presence. I think that we are so good with our children, their health, up to age of 11 in Sweden. One of the reasons is that we are very close with our children, very present with our children, but after age of 12 we suddenly lose this. We just disappear for them. They are now in hands of their friends in school and all this. So just the literal presence of the parents could be quite important for this issue. Now, as far as the society goes, can we, one can comment that the experience of stress as general in the Swedish society is not increasing anymore since year 2006 around. But the feeling of increasing demands is still present in our society. So year after year we judge the demands on us are increasing. We don't consider this as a reason for stress anymore, or it's not increasing, meaning that probably we're getting used to this, like the changing organizations all the time, as something very normal. But this is what we have, and the issue is how we stop this. Difficult to know. In the culture we're building right now, which is built on the market economy, it's very difficult to imagine how one would stop this, but there is an issue. Then there is the issue of equality, which is quite important, I think, that why the jobs which are preferred by women often are paid less, or women, the women end up with, I don't know if they're preferred, maybe they're preferred as well, and regarded as lower status than the jobs done preferred by men. And if you look at this is quite well expressed in the occupation, most stress occupations among the men, about the women and men here. So the place number 1 is assistant nurse as the most stressed. This is men and women in those professions. Child minder is probably the most stressful occupation among the women right now. But among the men, this is mechanical engineers and technicians, followed by the combat sales representatives. So we have definitely a large group in our society who is quite stressed and is paid very poorly for their efforts. I thought that we can give them some flowers for that they are willing to do that, even if they are less enumerated than men in this profession. And I would like to finish off by saying that this issue can be dealt in many ways. This is one of them. This is the Bob Hanson, who expresses this way. Maybe this is the way to go. But it's definitely so that if we are everybody in our society is embedded in this achievement trap. So there is no individual to get out of this, really, that we have to do somehow, do it together. And it's very difficult to see how right now, and we don't have much discussion about it right now in our society, right? Nobody questions our society from those points of view. If you'd like to read more about this, there is a book in Swedish called Duktighetsfällan, which we wrote with Joanna Rose. And also there is a book which is called Out of Balance, which is more about the stress-related disorders, if you would like to. And if you would like to know more about the stress-related disorders itself, so we have a website called stressmottagningen.com, where we discuss a lot of stress disease-related. So this is not a health site, this is a disease site, but it can be helpful if you would like to do some tests or be interested. Yeah, a question? Okay, so the question is that are there other reasons to be in achievement trap beside the low self-esteem? Well, of course they are, because we have the societal norms which are present in the society. If we want to succeed in the society, we probably have to be a lot like a persons like we describe in this extreme group. So it can be also explained by the norms in society, by our level of ambition, by our will to succeed. The only thing is that usually the people who follow those societal norms, but do it because of sheer pleasure or ambition, they usually don't have sleep disturbances. I mean, they can have it because they sleep too little, right? They are too active. Remember I told you that I was giving this lecture to young doctorate students in Cotejo, and the other question I got besides this, Alexander, can you speak faster? The other question was, can you teach us how to sleep 5 hours a night? So of course we can sort of, we can overdo it by changing our lifestyle. So finally our body is not doing well with it. So of course the second mechanism I would say is the norms the society values at the most right now, which we try to which we somehow of course have to live in the society, be successful, so we follow that, right? And we can overdo it. In our school study we found the girls were into this achievement trap by the low self-esteem, but some boys were in this because they just slept a little. They were doing too much of both physical activities, computer games, communications, and studying and everything. So they just, and when we told them that sleep is something which is important for learning, they were shocked by this idea, to be with. Idea that the more you exert, the more you have to rest, was something they never learned in their biology lessons, not from their parents. Yes, any other question? It was a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much. It was fun to lecture to you. Thank you.